And a gracious good morning to you. They've decided to rescue me from my own plight. We come up with a different one. The first plight was that I didn't seem to be able to walk up here without falling. So I've got a cane, which I've got over there. That shows you how much I've improved. I can walk from there to here without falling down. The second, as some of you have noticed, I seem to have an aversion to the earpiece microphone. I am of Italian descent, and so I talk with my hands. I have to learn to do it the way the dean does it. He does it both at the same time. I think that's the secret to keeping the earpiece in. But I do it this way, and the earpiece kept coming out, which drove the audio person crazy. He kept worrying about his very expensive microphone and what I was doing to it or might do to it. So he took things into his own hands, and now I have this, which I can grab out and walk around with, except that I can't walk around. But it's a wonderful, wonderful solution to a problem I didn't know I had. A gracious good morning to you. This is the third and final in a series on the inbreaking of the kingdom of God, which is an interpretation of the history and significances of the Festal service of lessons and carols. In brief summary, now I can do it in the proper order. Unlike what we usually think, that this all began in 1918 with the King's College service, it in fact began in 1880 with the Truro service. And that was a service that was put together by a man by the name of Benson, who eventually became Archbishop. A very, very thoughtful guy, who came from a great deal of poverty. His father died when he was 8. They lived in Birmingham. They had no money, and he raised his siblings. I mean, supported them and raised money to keep them going. So he's quite a guy. And wonderful, wonderful sensibilities. The service that we all know, and I said that service has the emphasis on Annunciation. And the second service, which I refer to as the Franciscan emphasis, appropriates the story that St. Francis of Assisi invented. And that is, he wove together the Matthean account and the Luke account. So he had the kingses and the sheepses and the shepherds, and he got all the peoples to dress up and do the thing that we still do today, which is dress up and, play like angels and stuff like that. So the theme, of course, changes because, to start with, it didn't happen that way. That was just, St. Francis was nothing if not an astute reader of people. There were too many people who wanted to come to the service. There's a problem that nobody really needs to have, in constant, these days that people would beg to have that problem. But no church would accommodate all the people, so he finds a grotto, which is a great big old cave in the side of a mountain in Gracchio, and in 1223 he put together the thing. He had live cows and donkeys and sheepses, and he had people dress up as kingses and shepherds and angels, because they had a lot of angels, and everybody loved it. Well, this created a problem because it was, sort of the celebration of poverty, and the Pope was not keen with that emphasis. If you're running a real estate empire, that's probably not the thing you want to hear about. But it was so popular that he decided to set it up as a permanent fixture. So now you can have the Christmas crash. And then what happened was St. Francis died, and within a year, they broke all the rules. He became a saint, and they went to his church, and they built a church on top of it. His church was this little shed. A number of you have been there. Bill and I were there a few years ago. It's just a very simple little shed. And over it, they've created this monster. And then there's this very humble cathedral up above, a two-story deal, a lower and an upper. And it's stunning because the frescoes are the frescoes of Giotto and Cimabue, who were the early Renaissance humanist painters. And they're truly extraordinary. I mean, your jaw drops when you see them, or mine did. I was sitting there enjoying it, and my kids said, we want to go, I was watching Giotto, and they said, we want to get gelato. I said, this is not gelato time. This is, I'm taking in Giotto. They said, you can take in whatever you want. We're going to get some ice cream. So, unfortunately, the guide who was with us bought into their story, and that took him to the best gelato place. It was terrible. Anyway, the story is remarkable because the frescoes on the right-hand side tell the story of Christ, and the stories on the left-hand side tell the story of St. Francis, and obviously they're identical. And you get to the front, and there is the cross, Jesus carrying the cross, and guess who's walking with him? Francis, he's carrying the cross. So the message for all the pilgrims is Francis is the second Jesus. So you see the power of things. Now, I say all that because when you get to the King's College chapel version of things, you have to understand that it's being conducted in a chapel that has these remarkable stained glass windows, right? And on the top is the story of, holy history. On the bottom is the other holy history, namely the history of England, which, by the way, corresponds step by step with holy history. So there's a theme here that if you do this in imitation of me, maybe you will be me too. So that's sort of the emphasis of the service from Cambridge, which was put together by a young man named Milner. And we'll do all that in a second. But I've got this presumptuous thing up here. I started this series by saying that we would try to say something about the true significance. And the answer is you can't say that. Because this is a sense of the whole. And anytime you name a part of the whole, you turn the whole into a part. So it's very paradoxical, but we can make gestures. And in order to help us, I've invoked a very fine former Anglican, Gerard Manley Hopkins, who was advised by another former Anglican, John Henry Newman. Now, both of them jumped ship and went home, so to speak, and became Roman Catholics. But one of the things that Hopkins did, he became an extraordinary poet. He died very young of typhoid fever. 6 months after he died, they found the cure. So it was just a most unfortunate thing for him. But no one ever heard of his poetry until after he was dead, and it turns out to be quite remarkable. Now, the thing that I'm interested in and want us to pay attention to just for a few seconds are two what we call neologisms. I mean, Hopkins liked to invent words. His orientation was toward what's called realism. And in this, he followed the great philosopher Duns Scotus. I should say philosopher, theologian. They didn't strike distinctions then the way we do today. So the philosopher, theologian Duns Scotus had a theory of how we apprehended the reality of the world, which was quite different from Occam, whose spirit is more like our own. And Occam said it's all a matter of words, what we grasp as words. And you've heard of Occam's razor. That is, you could cut through all the superfluity and just get to the essence of it, get the basic concept. So this is opposite from that. This is the belief that one can apprehend the true ordering of the universe, which is a very significant view. Shows up in people like Augustine. So it's a valued tradition, although not one we celebrate. It's okay, I'm going to celebrate it. I'm going to celebrate with two terms, both of which are perfectly annoying. One is in stress, and the other is inscape. Now, he uses these words in order to draw our attention to the very simple fact that when we grasp the totality of reality, in any single person, in any individual thing, the totality of reality is present. And he says that's held together by the force of creation or God. Hopkins didn't shy from talking about God as the power that held things together. Now, philosophers took a hold of this. And they made an interesting observation that the way in which Hopkins is thinking about this is, yes, there's an ordering of the world, and it has an impression, an impress, and in stress, if you will. And that in stress, or emphasis, I've been talking about emphases all along, that in stress or emphasis governs the way we put things together. So, where does this take us? There's a wonderful stained glass window of Hopkins, and here's the little sketch he did of in stress and inscape. And here's Duns Scotus, from whom he borrowed a great deal. And here you have two examples of landscapes or inscapes which reflect the totality of the glory of God. Okay, now how do we take this notion of an inscape and its in stress and reflect on what we've been talking about? Well, we're going to go first to St. Mary's, which was torn down, and to Edward White Benson, who was the first bishop of Truro, it's a newly created diocese. And they tear down St. Mary's to make way for this remarkable neo-Gothic cathedral which stands today. Needless to say, this did not sit well with the people, because they not only lost their church, they also lost many of their homes. Because, buildings take space. And St. Mary's was a small thing, and the Neo-Gothic Cathedral was a large thing, and so small things give way to large things. We're doing something like that right out here in the yard. If you see their little X's on beautiful trees, and think of them as the sufferings of the people of then. Yes, blessings, my brother. So, for new life, old life must go. I worry about that since I represent old life. But the point is that Benson really tuned in on the fact that people were terribly upset by this. And as I mentioned, he had come from Birmingham and was terribly poor, and then he lost his dad, and so he was even more impoverished. So he had just a razor-sharp sensibility about poverty, and he was wondering what on earth he could do. So he went and, at the advice of his one of his priests, a Secenter, whose job was to set the liturgy, and his name was Walpole. What a great name. So Walpole says, the way to get the people out of, into the church is to get them out of the taverns. And Benson said, that's going to be a neat trick. And he said, well, yeah, but we could do something that no one's ever heard of. We could sing the carols, which are the province of the tavern, in the church. Now, you may laugh, but that's the first time that Christmas carols ever make it into the church. You just act like it's been there all along. It's not true. That was his singular invention. So he got the music, the carols, and people came to sing the carols. The second really remarkable thing he did was he made the service largely readings from the Hebrew Bible, and he concluded with 2 readings from the letters, one from Galatians and one from 1 John, and the focus was becoming the children of God. So the fascinating thing is he has the Annunciation theme, and he really focuses on Elizabeth and Mary, and that hooks us right into the whole crew, starting with Sarah. There's a Hagar, there's a whole bunch of women known as barren women, but what that really talks about is they keep having children. You know, Sarah has a big laugh about it even. She goes outside the tent and says, God, surely you don't know Abe very well. I think I know him a little bit better than you do. This is not going to happen, the Lord said, watch me. Kabam. So the emphasis falls on the impossible possibility, and the gift is that impossible possibility is that we become children of God. It's a beautiful, beautiful service. It's quite extraordinary. So, it's in the midst of a great deal of poverty. It's got the emphasis on the Annunciation. Here's a wonderful stained glass window. And it ends, interestingly, in the way that we end today, with the Magnificat. So the Magnificat is what is, my soul doth magnify the Lord, but what's being magnified is that we become children of God. It's a very beautiful, beautiful idea. Now, my point is that the resonance of that service we can gesture toward. The resonance is of poverty, and it's a shed. The service is in a shed. It's not like this. It's literally, I've been, Sam, forgive me. They did move some dirt around this week, but every other week I've been able to see, we started this big building project, and you may have noticed nothing's happened. So the reality is they faced the same problem. All of a sudden, Christmas was on their hands, and so they threw together a shed. And that's where the first service was, it's in a wooden shed. By the way, no heat. They didn't put a stove in there until 6 years later. So it's freezing cold. They got a few candles. They've got flowers that are dying. And they have 400 people. And they're all in despair. But they feel a sense of community growing out of it. So the significance of the first service is the movement from despair to a sense of community. Now the second one, King's College. We have Edward White Milner, and Eric Milner White. I got it right now. And he's just back from the front, the Western Front, where he served as chaplain. And he's also suffered shell shock. So he's age 34, and he's made the dean of King's College. That's remarkable. A little scary, too. That's what he thought. So the first thing he does is he takes one of the side chapels in King's, and he turns it into a memorial for his fallen friends and for all those from King's and from Cambridge who have fallen. So immediately, the emphasis is on death. And then he does the second thing in the second year that he did. And he sort of borrows this from Benson, but he does his own thing, because Benson had most of the readings were from the Old Testament because he wanted to proclaim, to prophesy something different. Milner White goes the Franciscan route. He gives us the whole 9 yards. And he winds up with the prologue to the fourth gospel. And Benson doesn't do that. He puts it into the middle of the service, but he does not put it at the end of the service. But the most important thing is the two things you need to know about. In 1919, he writes a bidding prayer, which is the bidding prayer that is read to this day. Most of us don't really pay attention to the bidding prayer, whose focus is really on death. Lastly, let us remember before God, his pure and lowly mother, and all those who rejoice with us, but upon another shore and in a greater light, that multitude which no one can number, whose hope was in the Word made flesh, and with whom in this Lord Jesus we forevermore are one. That's Requiem, friends. It's extraordinary. So the whole thing is, the war is still going on when it's first done by the second. The other thing he introduces is the introduction of the service once in Royal David City. And that lyrical voice has been with us ever since. But that's his invention. He is known as one of the great, and by the way, he also did something that we sort of do, sort of. Of course, we are we, so we do things the way we do them. But in 1934, he thought, we're getting kind of carried away with this Christmas thing, and we're missing the Advent piece. This is before the Episcopal Church had gotten around to declaring that Advent was not the same thing as Christmas. That took us until 1966 to figure that one out. So this is before that. And they had to put together an extra book of services to say, well, yeah, Advent's a different beast. And it's different from Christmas, and it's different from Eucharist. So we've got that rolling around as an emphasis in the background. But in this particular one, 1934, he says, we need to have, which we're going to do today, a service, a procession of lessons and carols on Advent Sunday. 1934, that's the first one. Now, it bears no resemblance to what's going to happen today. Because in the 1934 version, there's virtually no talking. It's mostly sung. There are a few prayers and a few readings, but it's really quite exquisite. Excuse me. So, we have the whole sense, which is sort of tiptoeing into the back door, that there's a profound link between the Advent service and the service of lessons and carols with the Great Vigil. After which, by the way, it is an imitation. Great Vigil has been around since the 3rd century. These services are late 19th, early 20th century inventions. They are built on Middle Ages practices, but it is really an imitation of the Great Vigil, which is quite simply holy history told in lesson and song, which is what Great Vigil is. It's what these services are. So this is the sense of the Vanquished Requiem. This is an extraordinary painting from 1878, but it captures the sense of what Milner was after. Now, Ussens. I found a picture without cars in it. That's hard. And the question is, what do we do? Well, this is a time that's really complicated to talk about, and I'm going to risk a whole lot by trying to say what I think is going on. I say risk because it's bound to upset somebody, but That's the risk of inviting me to talk. I'm going to upset somebody. I mean, earlier I was the perfect Grinch. Remember, I stole, Christmas from you. I told you that nobody knows what happened on Christmas Eve, that those are little theological afterthoughts. Matthew wasn't there, Luke wasn't there. I know some lady told me that her pastor had told her that Paul wrote down, what happened at the birth, and her pastor had told her that was so. And as I mentioned to you, I was prepared to do something very wrong, which was to say, oh, no, that's just not right. But I saw the bronze bust of the pastor sitting in the hall, and I said, no, that's not right either. So what I did instead was to say, he must have access to documents I've yet to see. So, but the point is, we've got lots of different things, and what we have now is a battle. And in my mind, the battle is between partisan pieties. And the thing about piety, Eric Hoffer, back in the 60s, wrote a little book called The True Believer. And he really got there. Once you get what you believe is the absolute truth, you hold on to it, and then you defend it. So the true belief frequently comes out of, black-white thinking, polar opposites. There's no kind of in-between. It's right or it's wrong. Now, I want you to hear what I'm saying. I am not saying that one side does this and the other side doesn't. What I'm saying, what guarantees my trouble, is both sides are doing the same thing, which is why our perspicuous dean says, well, Christian identity is distinct from partisanship. I gave him forewarning that I was going to say this, and also that I was going to say sort of. But because the point of the service is identity unfolds in the midst of a world bereft of love and listening. And that happens, so you have this sense of, those who've got the straight and narrow path, and then this. What you just said again, I wanted to think it. Okay, what was it I said? I believe what I said. Yeah. We live in a world that's very frightened. And when we're frightened, we tend to divide things into nice, neat categories. Generally, the good over here and the bad. When I was a kid, they used to have cowboy movies, and I was always helped because the good guys wore the white hats and the bad guys wore the dark hats, Well, we still do cowboys films in our minds, because we have the good and the bad. And by the way, you'll be surprised to learn this, we assign ourselves the role of the good, and the others are the bad guys, right? So now the problem becomes, what am I going to do with my bad stuff? Well, a very sophisticated psychoanalyst by the name of Melanie Klein said, well, we split that off and we toss it out and put it on the other person. So all of my stuff goes somewhere else, and then I can hate all the things I hate about myself in you because you are all the things I hate. And so suppose you fight back. Well, then I get really upset, and I protect it. And I protect it with my life, because my identity is under siege. Now, I think that's what's going on, and this is across board. This is not one camp or another. It's that both partisans have become pieties. And as you know, piety is a very dangerous sort of thing, because people who think they're pious think they've sort of crossed the line. They're going to get a gold star. And I've been trying for a long time. I don't have any gold stars, so I can assure you at my advanced age, You don't get gold stars for piety. What you do is get in a lot of trouble because you get lost in your piety and you don't listen. We don't. I mean, it's not you don't and I do. It's none of us do. None of us are hearing what's going on, and this creates a state of enemy in which our social fabric is rent. And the things that we rely on, the ordering that we rely on, disappears. And that's very, very frightening because we rely on that without realizing it. It's our assumptive world. We got real clear about this during COVID. All of a sudden, the way we did things disappeared. And we didn't realize that we had an assumptive world that had suddenly evanesced. And we felt totally lost. Well, we're in that kind of loss right now. So that the tension is between Anna and me and the hope for the peace that Christ will bring, Isaiah 11. This is Edward Hicks' Peaceable Kingdom. And it's probably most appropriate to say that this service, this year, will have a different resonance than the King's College service or the Benson Truro service, because, with all due apologies, you can't take Christian identity out of time. It's an intersection of the fullness of time, the so-called pleroma, the fullness of God, with chronological time. This happens here and now, otherwise it wouldn't make any difference. But it then puts a weight on us because we attest to that. We're called to that. That makes a requirement on us to be faithful to that sense. And that makes us children of God, on why we sing the Magnificat. At this point, if my audio-visual thing is happening, well, it's not happening. You may need to come and see why it's not happening. Right now, you're listening. You don't know this, but you're listening to Arvo Part's Magnificat. Yeah.
Because it's not in the video.
but its resonance is perfectly clear in the Magnificat. And that is what we celebrate in these festal services, each time in a different way. Now let me take some questions. Well, I did really well today. I silenced them all, Sam.
So you talk about the pieties in conflict.
Yeah, we're stuck with these things.
You talked about the pieties being in conflict, and I can think of a number of pieties that are in conflict in our world today, but I didn't understand in the service what the pieties are that are in conflict.
It's not in the service, it's what we bring to the service. I was talking about that Gerard Manley Hopkins point about the in-stress and the inscape. The inscape of the Truro service is great poverty and a hope of community. The inscape of the Cambridge service is massive death, the sense of the loss of the culture, and the terror that Western culture had come to an end, and the hope for a requiem, that there would be peace. In our time, I think it's a conflict between pietisms, which sets the conflict between, on the one hand, anomie, a sense of aimlessness, a sense of dread, of not knowing what's about to unfold, and the yearning for the peaceable kingdom, for accord. So anomie and accord are the watchwords, I think, but we'll know when we experience these services what we experience, but that's my sense of that. And I guess my parting word would be that whatever the significance of the service is, it's unfolding. It's a work in progress. So what began as an expression of a hope for community and then evolved into a sense of requiem and eternal rest, and evolves again into the hope for a peaceable kingdom, which is really hard because we're looking at a world in so many tatters. I mean, the Syrian conflict has erupted again. The Middle East has been a mess for forever. African nations are in trouble. South American nations are in trouble. We're in a great deal of global upheaval, more so than any time in recent history. And it's not helped by the fact that none of us seem to be willing to listen, to see in each other the best, not forgetting our shortcomings. But when we do our pietisms, there are no bests in the other. There are only the shortcomings. The shortcomings we know best because they are ours, quite frankly. And we've made our pietisms into orthodoxies. And those who believe are on the in, and those who do not believe are on the out. That's what Eric Hoffer called the true believer. So when we come to these services today and in a few weeks, we come with a very different sense of the world than has gone before us. And my sense is the significance of the service cannot be understood apart from that. That's where Sam and I have agreed to kind of talk back and forth about this. He's absolutely right. The Christian identity is not identical with partisan identity, which means that Christian nationalism is already in trouble for a whole lot of reasons. But one is it separates fear from faith. And fear or reverence and awe has always been part of faith. They live in a dialectical tension. So it's not a particular emphasis, but rather the dissolution and disavowal of any viewpoint other than our own that is making the time so frightening. And that is the context within which our identities are unfolding. It's not like when I was a boy, or when a number of you were young. I know when I was a boy, the brontosaurus was wandering around the face of the earth, but we just gave them tree branches and they were nice. But the sense of how things worked, a man by the name of Putnam has written a book called Bowling Alone. And he talks about the dissipation of communal activity in favor of individual activity. He said, when I was growing up, there were bowling leagues. And people joined Kiwanis or the Lions or any number of these churches, the YMCA. There was a sense of communal involvement. Now people bowl by themselves. We've lost that sense of community. It's a very different world that we live in. And so it becomes easy to become frightened and easy to see the other as evil and ourselves as possessors of the truth. And I think the humility of these services is we become the children of God. That's the prayer. That's what the Magnificat is about. I need to stop so that, oh, I'm sorry. You got 10 minutes. Oh, I do. Wow, that's somebody told me last week. They said, stop. Okay, fine. Well, yeah, sir, I'm grateful that you're back. Okay, other questions?
Oh, I didn't think you answered it.
Oh,
You answered my question, but it was more of the understanding of the pietism and the relationship with the Magnificat.
yeah. I think the Magnificat, you know, it's a song of astonishment. You know, Mary sings it, and she's been right with Elizabeth, you know, and Elizabeth is great with child. I mean, they're both having kids when they weren't supposed to be having kids. Rembrandt can't resist. His painting of the Annunciation has Zechariah blind. Like, I didn't do it. I don't have anything to do with this. It comes as a surprise. And the Magnificat, my soul doth magnify the Lord, is also an expression of surprise. Because now there's the possibility, the impossible possibility, that we will become children of God. Now that's the hope on the other side of the partisan pietism. It's not like one, there are two. And, you know, religious wars don't go very well. There's one called the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1638, and it was all about religious difference. Then never got settled. It was about who got to worship what, where. And the conclusion 30 years later was to restate what the agreement had been before and to eliminate the hiring of mercenaries. Because Wallenstein was a mercenary, he didn't care who he killed. But religious wars are vicious because everybody believes they're right. And nobody listens. Now, when we become children of God, it isn't that some people get to be children of God. You know, the ones who've got the merit badges, they get in. The point is that we all become children of God. And so, you know, sometimes we like to pat ourselves on the back because we still go to church and say, we're the faithful remnant, you know, we're doing the right thing. Go club. But the truth is, in the fullness of time, the faithful remnant disappears because all become equal in the eyes of God in the fullness of time. So this is not getting merit badges for good behavior here so you get a quick pass to get into the golden city. This is about becoming something that we were created to be, but have fallen wide of, all of us. And the promise of this season is that we, again, should become children of God. It's a very beautiful, beautiful idea. I really like the Benson emphasis, the Annunciation emphasis. I think we get carried away with the creche thing, and it's become, pile high, all the gifts, which is lovely, I guess. But it misses the point. The point is really what John was talking about in the prologue, that we become children of God. I mean, God becomes tabernacled and lives amongst us. There's that wonderful word, tabernacled. That's what the original Greek says, it tabernacled. Sets up a holy space within which we are all a part and dwells with us, whereby we become children of God. Now I think the word has come from the man. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.